work session to order. There is just one item on our agenda this evening, and that is the portion of our budget that has to do with the capital improvement plan. And I believe our city manager is going to lead us off, and then...
Yeah, Madam Mayor, members of the council, this is our second of the sort of in-depth dives, but as you all know, we have had a number of budget work sessions throughout, starting with the session in June this summer, and then we had another one in August regarding the levies. And so we have continued to work on the budget and to make some changes, and this is tonight. We're going to talk about the enterprise funds, as well as the capital improvement overview. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the utility fees as well as a piece of this, but Ms. Stry is here to go through the presentation. We also have some follow-up from questions that were raised in the last budget hearing. Some of those answers are throughout the presentation and some are at the end. The ones related to property taxes will be at the very end. And then we have some questions for you all to give us further direction. Also, Mr. Albrecht and Mr. Schultz are here to help talk about the details of the different capital projects as well. So unless you have any questions for me to start with, we will jump right in. We have quite a bit of ground to cover tonight. So.
Okay. Thank you very much, City Manager Johnston. First, I also want to let everyone know that Councilmember Nguyen is not going to be here. She is in a lot of pain. Her hip is out of joint. But she's going to be watching us. And so I have my phone out because she says if she has questions, she's going to text. So when she texts, I will ask her question. But she is tuned in and watching us. So with that, I think we can proceed. Mr. Albrecht or Ms. Stry?
Okay.
Who's leading?
Thank you. We are going to be tag teaming throughout the PowerPoint. So
Okay.
We'll start out with the process that we have. I think it's going to come up on the screen in a moment. There we go. Just a reminder, as we always do at each of these meetings, that there are a lot of these meetings we've been throughout the year, and we began a long time ago when it was just getting warm, and back in June. So we first started out with the projections that we reviewed in June, and then in August we refined those a little bit to create the maximum tax levy, and which is what you adopted September 2nd. And that's what folks are seeing on their property tax statements as well. That was a 4.4% increase. Since then, our departments have been working hard on the budget to refine those numbers and get better estimates, and came down to a 4.0% increase. So the actual, when people get their actual property tax statements, if the direction we continue to go here is 4.0, that will be less than those proposed property tax statements that everybody received. We had the virtual budget open house. That is still on our website, and that's a very good reference for the public to take a look at and see what is it that each of the departments do and how do they spend their money and what are the pressures that they have. It's a great overview of the budget. And then a couple weeks ago, November 10th, we had our first detailed work session on the proposed budget, and we're having tonight's meeting on the 25th, of course, tonight, the second of those detailed budget work sessions. Tonight, as I mentioned, we're looking at a 4.0, and we had come all the way from 6.9 was the original projection, so we've come a long way. The last budget work session, we covered the general fund and those things that are very related to the property taxes, special revenue funds, and tax increment financing. Tonight, we will be looking at the capital improvements program and the debt service fund and the enterprise fund. So, moving into the capital improvement program, the CIP, for the next 5 years. This is a document within the budget that engineering and finance and other departments work on to plan for capital improvements. The document itself is a 5-year plan from 2015 to 2019, but really, in reality, the engineering department and other departments have much more extended plans that they're looking out and making plans for those capital purchases. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Albrecht.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Strye. Madam Mayor, members of the council, again, just to reemphasize, people ask, well, is it just a 5-year plan? It's really, all our documents are a minimum of 15 years. We have some that stretch out to 20 years. And the reason for that is, even though we don't always know the exact year, we need to identify the things that need to be done. And those years tend to move around a little bit, but that way we can project rates, we can look at issues ahead of time and expect them when they come up. So I'm going to take you through the public works portion of the CIP. We'll be touching on street projects, our collector and thoroughfare projects. Those are our larger county road type projects. Intersection improvements, those would be our street light and signal improvements. The street light system itself, the city maintains almost 1,000 street lights on our own, and we also arrange for the improvement of street lights in our neighborhoods as we go along that are owned by Dakota Electric and Excel. The water system improvements, sanitary sewer system, and then our stormwater management. We're going to start with, and then also we'll be touching on, Terry will get involved in the parks capital plan, and then Kelly and I will kind of tag team through vehicles, equipment. She'll handle IT, and then we'll also work together on the ice center, the golf course, and the Ames Center. Jumping into the Public Works CIP, I think this is a good slide just for the council, for the public to understand. Over the next 5 years on the public works side of things, the city of Burnsville is going to spend about $85 million on infrastructure. That's a significant investment the council's making. $27 million alone next year is programmed. So the council is investing in our infrastructure. And when people ask, what are we doing? That's what we're doing. We are investing a significant amount of money. When we look at the Public Works CIP over that 5-year period, you can see in black we've got our street improvements, and then we've got what would be our collector and our intersection improvements in the shades of gray. So those are the road-related improvements. And then you'll jump into the utility improvements, which would be in blue, and the green are the stormwater improvements. What you're going to notice most is our biggest demands obviously are in streets. And with right along behind that are our utility improvements, primarily the water system. And the water system is twofold. When we do a neighborhood where the water system is old, we also end up doing the water system at the same time. And so street projects are a driver for those utility projects. And we also have an aging water system. Unfortunately, over the last 50 years, different products have been used in the industry, and those products, when they were put in, were thought that they'd last 100 years. In many cases, those products last 25, 30 years, 40 years. And so Burnsville is in the middle of changing out some of the different pipes that we've installed back in the 60s and 70s. And we're getting through that. We're probably halfway through that process. And so that's why we still see those significant dollars associated with the water department. The other thing I want to bring to your attention on this slide is it looks like next year's a little disproportionate. The reason for that is, you'll recall, we moved Burnsville Parkway and Nicollet Avenue improvements up to next year. Originally, those had been spaced out to separate years in the future, but the condition of those two streets just didn't allow us. The funding was always programmed. We just advanced the funding to 2015 to get that done sooner than later. We'll jump into our street improvements next. This slide right here looks at our street improvements over that 5-year period. About $53 million worth of street improvements. You'll note the black is our recon and rehab. That's really the guts of the city's program. That's the neighborhood reconstructions and then the rehabilitations of the larger city streets, the city collector streets. We've got a little bit of intersection lighting and overlays. That's the lighter gray. We did a huge overlay project last year. You'll note that we are still doing overlay projects almost every year, not quite every year, but that's now a permanent part of the city CIP long term. It's both a maintenance and to deal with some of these early failures that we're seeing. But this year, doing almost 10 miles of those overlays really helped get the city ahead of the curve, at least on that issue, I think. And then the last item is the collector thoroughfare. You'll notice a chunk next year that's related to the Cliff interchange project that we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation.
Yeah.
Mayor, Mr. Albrecht, what would 2014, what was 2014's recon rehab roughly?
2014's recon rehab would have been right around the $8 million mark.
Yeah, that's-
Burnsville Parkway and Nicollet is a $4 to $5 million add to the program by advancing that. The overlay that we got did 10 miles of street. We got incredible prices. We did 10 miles of street for $1.7 million. I mean, a lot of value there. We won't see those types of prices again anytime soon. So the city, we're really rather fortunate with our timing. We got a lot of bang for our buck with last year's
Well, it
project.
was a wise decision to do. So, I mean, and it looks like by this graph for the audience at home, or C-SPAN audience watching at home, or the replay on the web, that it looks as if 2015 was the big investment, but we've actually made, aside from that
Yep.
one
2014
isolated
was
Burnsville
almost as big
Parkway,
investment.
Yeah.
2014 was very big, 2015 is going to be big, 2016 is going to be big. We're backing off a little bit, but out years
16
18
and 17 are
19.
down a little bit because those were the years that Burnsville Parkway and Nicollet were going to be in, so it would have been much more even if we not needed to advance those years. So,
And then 18, 19, that's
Picks right
pretty
back
big,
up.
9, 9, and 9, 8, and we came off a big year at 8,
Yep.
roughly. So we are absolutely positively addressing all of our street reconstruction needs, something that everyone knows has been a top of mind and top of complaint issue
Yep.
by our citizens for the last few years. So
Yes.
it is being addressed. We've done a lot. We got a lot more to do.
we have lots to do, and later on in the presentation, Ms. Stry will go through the ITF and the funding in that program, and you'll see we are leveraging all the dollars we have. We're not running with big balances in those accounts. We're taking it down to the bare minimum of what we think we can operate the account to make sure we're using every dollar we can to improve those streets.
One of the things I really compliment staff on is that we stay around $8 to $9 million in really working on all of these road reconstruction. This is a bigger bump
Yep.
because of the Parkway and Nicollet. But that's a big chunk when you
Yes.
take Nicollet from McAndrews all the way down to 13. That's a huge
It's
chunk.
a big chunk, and the other thing too I think is important is the council has a sustained plan.
Yeah.
This isn't shoot the bullet once and and then we're down again. And the reason that's important is
always
we're
been
trying to get
steady.
away from the roller coaster that
Yes.
the initial development of the city brought us. The
Yeah.
city developed substantially prior to 1980. Now,
Yeah.
all those miles of streets, we can't possibly do them in a 5 to 10 year period.
Yeah.
We're getting through that bubble. We don't want to create a future bubble for other generations. We
Yeah.
want to have a constant program moving forward. And so that's the other thing that the council's done by staying committed to the program, but trying not to do too much at once, but do it at a paced setting.
That's a very, very good point, Madam
It
Mayor.
is.
You know, I know that we'll all be here 30 or 40 years from now, and we're going to look back and go, that was so wise of you, Steve, to do that back then, because now we have a more even.
And that was one of the things, Ms. Stry, with the ITF, is to make sure that we have a very steady, and you don't have those peaks and valleys in terms of our reconstruction and rehab, and also the assessment to the people. So that was part of that, is to stabilize that kind of hit on our
Yep.
residents.
And long term, as we get through this initial reconstruction of our streets, we'll be able to move more to an overlay and rehabilitation of neighborhood streets too. So that'll allow the council to do much more with less money in the future.
Yeah.
Jumping to the next slide real quickly, funding sources. These are the sources that fund the street projects, the ITF and the MSAS, which is our municipal state aid. The city of Burnsville, we receive money
Huge.
for our mileage of state aid from the state, and that money goes directly into our streets. We do have a portion that goes to our street maintenance budget also, a small portion, but the majority of that account is used for construction. Again, the reason that's a little bit bigger in 2015, we're advancing Burnsville Parkway and Nicollet are both state aid streets. Our big 2015 projects, obviously the annual street rehabilitation, we're at about $5.5 million. We're doing the neighborhood to the west of 35 and Aldrich and south of Burnsville Parkway. That area is getting reconstructed next year as part of the annual reconstruction.
Mary?
I would just like people to know how old those streets are over there.
Those streets date back to the 60s.
60s,
So,
yeah.
Thank you.
So we're talking
Thank you.
50-year-old streets in some cases. So
Because we finished all North River Hills,
Yep.
which was the oldest, some of the oldest parts, but now we're going to be a little,
Yep.
yeah.
And so we have our rehabilitation, our reconstruction. The reconstruction is that neighborhood. The rehabilitation, that's the Burnsville Parkway project. Also included in that is Aldrich near 42. If you're familiar with that area, that road is in dire need near Target and
Yeah.
our shopping center area there. So that road is part of that. It's a smaller piece, but that also is included in that. And then our maintenance overlays, we'll still be doing about $500,000. So we'll be able to pick off a neighborhood a year of rehabilitation of neighborhood streets. So we won't be doing as much as we did this year, but we'll be continuing to catch up with those areas, because you'll remember we had more than 10 neighborhoods
Yeah.
that needed it, and we'll keep picking away at those.
Okay.
And then the other big project is the thoroughfare project, Cliff Road Interchange. And I want to touch on this a little bit, and we'll talk about it later. We're going to come to the council with a study on this early next year. And I think it's important, a big part of the funding of this project is TIF. And we need to take a close look at the type of development that we project over the next 10 to 15 years in the MRQ based on the slowdown to the quarry. And I think staff will talk about maybe what we would call an interim project and a long-term vision project, that it may not make sense to do the total improvements at this time, just because we're not going to generate the tax increment necessary until that area fully redevelops. And I don't think we're going to see that type of development immediately, and so that's something we need to talk about. And so just because this project is in the CIP doesn't mean we're going to do the project for sure. It's there. We're going to have more conversations in January, February, and we'll come up with a long-term game plan for this project. And it'll be an important project.
Is that going to be aligned at the same time that the bridge is going to be reconstructed, or are we going to be making that decision
We'll talk
before-
about those timings with the council and talk about what our options
an
are.
all-day work session when we?
What I would tell you is they made some interim improvements during the project where they made some changes just to how cars can get in and out of there off of the ramps. And we saw some dramatic improvements of traffic flow. And for us to make the type of improvement we're talking about with the primary users being freight trucks, quarry trucks, that may not be the best use of the taxpayers' dollars at this time. And so we want to have that conversation. Not that it's not important, but they don't need the type of roadway that we would want that the redevelopment's going to need. And so we'll have that conversation early next year. Just want the council to be aware. Just because this is in here doesn't mean we're going to move forward with this project next year. We're going to talk about it and make some smart decisions financially.
And I also want to make sure that we really address the timing with what's happening on the bridge
Exactly.
reconstruction. Mayor?
I just wanted to explain for anybody who's watching, you're talking about the I-35W bridge over to Bloomington.
That's
Correct.
right.
Which could be reconstructed anytime as soon as 2017 out to
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah. So that's still in
Just
terms
so
of-
they know, understand what bridge we're talking about.
Yeah, 35W bridge.
Exactly. And then in the improvement program, we continue to do county and city traffic signals on a yearly basis where we're participating in those, so you'll see funding for those. Just to remind the public, we have 64 traffic signals in Burnsville. The city of Burnsville owns a third of those ourselves,
That's
and
what
we're
I-
partners with MnDOT and the county on the other ones, meaning we own anywhere from 25% of the signal to 100% of 64 signals. So it's in the neighborhood of an $8 to $10 million asset that the city owns that people forget about.
Yeah.
And many of those signals, again, were built a long time ago, and so they need to be renovated. Unprogrammed projects, we just want to touch on these, make people aware. We do still have the bridge elements on both, the ones that would be removed from the 1335 bridge, and then the ones that we are going to have to rehab off of the Burnsville Parkway and 35 bridge. We rehabbed the lighting on that bridge this year. The elements, at some point with the rust related to those, they will have to be removed. However, we're monitoring it. We're not going to advance that project until it needs to be done, but it is out there, so it's in the CIP just to be noted. And then the 13 pedestrian bridge project that we've talked about earlier this year, that's pretty much on hold until we got some good news on the orange line that it's moving forward.
Yeah.
But there still hasn't been any decisions made on where that station is going to be in Burnsville, and that would be a big driver for the need of a pedestrian bridge. Without that, it's tough to justify an expenditure like that. So that's kind of on hold right now as an unprogrammed project. Jumping into the utilities CIP, just touching on our big projects for next year, you're aware of the meter replacement project. That is a large project. It's a 2-year project. 17,000 meters and radio units will be replaced in the city over that 2-year period. And so we've spent quite a bit of time talking about that project, so I won't go too into detail. I've got another slide on the funding of that project a little later in the presentation. System rehabilitation. Those are the various rehabilitation projects we do that aren't related to the recon projects throughout the system. We've got 17 wells. We've got 3 reservoirs, 2 towers. So we have a significant amount of infrastructure we're taking care of. Stores hydrant nozzles. We have a couple more years of that program left, and we will have all the public hydrants done in probably about 4 years, I believe. And so once that's done, we'll have to make a decision on how do we get done with There's going to be still probably several hundred private hydrants that we'll want to have a conversation about. We've had some buy-in, but limited buy-in from the private entities on those. Not something to talk about tonight, but something to have on your radar that's out there in the future. The groundwater plant, 2017, 2018, you visited that this fall. We've known for a while that our 35-year-old plant is in need of some rehabilitation in the middle of the plant, and we will be addressing that in 17 and 18. Again, that's been programmed in the CIP. And then we attached the street recon and rehab just to show people there's a considerable amount of money from the utility funds that upgrades water main and sewer with that project. Street recon alone next year is going to have over $3 million of utility funds going into those improvements. So we forget that sometimes. We say, let's do as many streets as we can. Well, we have to be careful and strategic because it does impact water and sewer rates also. Jumping to our sanitary lift station management, again, we have 14 lift stations in town that pump sewage in our system, and so we will be rehabilitating those on an ongoing basis. Our rehabilitation, that's the lining of our sewers. We hope that one day we'll be lining water mains also, and the cost there will go down. I think in the next 10 years that'll be a reality. The technology is getting there, and that'll be a boon for the city too, because instead of having to dig and replace every water main, you'll now be able to line those, and that's a real good bang for the buck that we see on the sanitary sewer side of things. Stormwater management annual capital program. Our lateral drainage modifications, that's kind of our miscellaneous projects. We clean up issues throughout town, and the council has been dedicated to that program since the early 90s, I believe. I think Craig Ebling started that program, and it's a credit to the city that when we had the rains we had earlier this year, the city of Burnsville had little to no issues with those rains, and that's because the city over a 20-plus year period has cleaned up a lot of those drainage issues. We've got our cleanup, our pond cleanout and outfall improvements that we do annually. And also we wanted to show street recon and rehab. We do spend a lot of stormwater money associated with that too as we go through and rehab our streets to bring those up to compliance stormwater-wise. Stormwater management, yes, we do have lift stations for stormwater also. We have 8 of those lift stations, and so those are extremely important. They don't run all the time, but when they do run, they need to be done. We're doing a big one out here on McAndrews, just north of it right now in that neighborhood to the west of Nicollet. The Black Dog Outfall project, too many dogs there. We are repairing, there's a outfall from a large section of the city that runs under the railroad tracks that we've been monitoring. It's been eroding for years. We continue to monitor it. This project, that $95,000, is there more for emergency purposes if we need it, because it is the type of situation that we can't mess around with the railroad. If it gets to a certain point, we do have to make a repair. You'll see that out in 2017 we have a replacement project. If we get to the replacement project, the good thing is we won't need to use that 95. Our hope is that we can get to 2017. And so I just want the council to understand that we won't be doing the repair and the replacement both. We're hoping to get to that, but we do need to have the money dedicated as it's getting close to the point where if something happens, we may need to fix that. We've got a series of Keller Lake water improvements. This particular improvement is actually at Crystal Lake Beach, I believe, and it has to do with some outfall improvements to improve water quality to Keller Lake. MRQ, we've got the second pond project in the MRQ. Next to JB O'Meara, there's some dry ponds there that'll be improved. And again, those are part of our master planning, so when we get development down there, we don't need to have ponds on the individual properties. Those ponds will be on the city property and city ponds. We've done the one on the west side out by Yellow Freight. That pond is up and running and is ready for development to occur on that end. This kind of completes it and bookends it on the west side. Future projects, we have another Keller Lake Pond project on the other side of the lake that's going to help with water quality in 2016. Ravine restoration on the north edge of the city going down the river bluffs. We have some ravines that are starting to erode with stormwater systems that have been there since the 60s and early 70s, and so we are going to start doing some repairs to those over time. We've got a project out in 2018, that's what that's related to. And then we've got some other miscellaneous stormwater basin projects, 2017, 2018. And with that, I will turn it back to Kelly Stride to go through the financial plan.
Thank you. We take all of those numbers that have been accumulated in the CIP and we plug those into the financial, 5-year financial plans to see how that affects the balances in those funds. And so that's where we'll go from here. The Improvement Construction Fund, this is basically a zero balance fund. As we take all of those projects that Steve just talked about, each of those projects have a funding source that matches the expenditure. And so we carry, while some of the projects may cover more than 1 year, what we're talking about is just that total project, the ones that we're planning for. They may cover multiple years, but we're going to talk about them as if they're all in the 1 year. The funding sources that we look at on those projects would be some intergovernmental revenue. That would be if we're partnering with the county or the federal, that money would go into here. Special assessments for the property owners that might be abutting these projects. Any bonding, if we're bonding for anything, that would be another revenue source. And then transfers, if there are some pieces of the project that need to be funded by some of the other funds, such as water and sewer, and some of those others. So as you can see, the revenues equally match, and every year revenues match expenditures. And in 2015, our big projects are that we were just talking about are included in there, but revenues match expenditures. And then moving on to the Infrastructure Trust Fund. The purpose of this fund is to maintain the infrastructure. We've had this fund for quite a number of years now. It allows us to be pay-go on all of those recon projects. We also combine our state aid into this fund because it's similar types of projects, or typically the same project will have both if it's a state aid street. We have increased the ITF levy by $50,000 as planned, as per the plan. And then the state aid depends on the streets and rehab areas that we're doing. So we draw down the state aid that's allocated to Burnsville based on the projects that it is going to fund. And as Steve mentioned, we're advancing those projects. The state allows us to advance the future years, which is really helpful. It makes us, allows us rather to leverage the future monies when we need them.
With no interest or penalty.
That's
either,
right.
so-
That is really great. Yeah, Gary?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Dry, on the line item, you have a line item of interest, and this would be a source of funds. And it's dropping quite a bit in 2016, 2017, and so forth. Where does that come from? Where does that money come from?
That comes from investing the balance that sits in that fund. So we invest any available funds, and we actually do that as a pool across all of our funds, and based on the balances carried in that fund. So we've had a couple years with a little bit higher balances in the ITF fund.
Okay.
And as we draw that down, then it's going to earn less interest.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's good for our people to know. Our ITF fund, our staff does a very good job in investing it, and so our money is making money, and we continue to draw down on those to pay for our infrastructure.
As best we can. Of course, interest rates are
Yeah.
pretty low, so it's a nominal amount these days. The overlays would be included in this fund as well, and the fund balance is sufficient to provide cash flow and project contingency. And we try to keep our goal as we're doing these 5-year plans is about $2 million remaining in that fund. Now, we can go up and down between years as we're planning those projects, but we're trying not to take it down at a steady pace. We're trying to take that target of $2 million. So this is what the next 5 years looks like for the ITF fund. As I mentioned, we have a pretty high
steady.
ending balance in 2014. The projected ending balance is going to be around $4 million, and that's due to some savings and then a planned use of state aid and some of our other funding for that 2015 big year. So as there are projects that are favorable and have savings, that stays in the ITF fund and is available for use in the next year's projects. So the purple line demonstrates where that fund balance would be at the end of each of those years. So you can see we're kind of targeting that $2 million range where we. Questions on the ITF fund?
No, it's where our projects are and where the fund is. It's just steady. It doesn't have a lot of peaks and valleys. So that's what we've been seeing year after year because of that.
Okay. The street maintenance fund, this is a small fund that we maintain to handle seal coat and crack sealing, traffic marking, right-of-ways, maintenance like the guardrails and those kinds of things that we have. And then when we've funded the monuments, or the first monument, that is going through this particular fund. Its sources and uses are pretty well matched throughout the future years, and we're maintaining a fund balance there that is right in target, in line with the goals of this particular fund. Parks Capital Fund. We're going to turn
Thank you,
it
Ms.
over.
Strye. I think I'm going to take over for a little bit. The Parks Capital Fund, as Mr. Albrecht mentioned, we also have an inventory of all the park amenities. We assign a life expectancy to all of those amenities, and it really is a 20 to 30-year plan. And as those amenities come due for replacement, we go out and field verify whether they actually need to be replaced once they come within that 5-year window. So we do have a very detailed plan for maintaining our park system.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Dan.
Terry, I just want to pass on a compliment. Because of the last several years of a soft economy and difficult tax revenue times for everybody, if anybody's learned how to stretch an asset farther than its life expectancy and
parks.
get by and make do, it's your park department.
Yeah.
I know when you go out and you just said, pay a visit, do a site visit, verify that it really needs to be replaced. Then you come to us and we go, can you push it out another year? Can you push it out another year? And at the same time, in traveling around the city this past election cycle, I was very impressed with how many parks had the playground equipment replaced, and really the condition of the parks was really very good. So, hats off to you for stretching the dollar, and yet we still were able to get those parks with some new equipment and slides and swings and all kinds of fun stuff for everybody.
Thank you, Councilmember Keeley. The Parks Capital Fund, there are 3 sources of revenues that support this fund, and they are general fund support, infrastructure trust fund, and then development fees, or I call them park dedication fees. Yeah. Those are one and the same. That's the only development fee that we collect related to the Parks Fund.
And that has been going down ever since the 90s because we don't have much development going on. So
that has been going down. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But I want to share, I guess, for those who might be watching, that it's very typical for a community of our age to have to kind of transition to park dedication fees are going down. Yeah. We're fully developed. You only charge park dedication fees once on a property. So once it's been charged, that's it for the life of the property. And so we are at that point. We really reached it a few years ago, and we started talking with you, council members, about, okay, how do we start getting more general fund support into the Parks Capital Fund. So that transition is really something we've been planning for and working on for some time. In regard to that, the general fund support, we are proposing some increases because we have delayed or postponed some of those increases to get through some of the budget challenges. The plan was to now kind of reinstate some of those funds and try and get the Parks Capital Fund up to where we think it needs to be long-term to maintain the park system. So in 2015, we do have in this budget a $155,000 increase to bring the general fund support to $725,000. We also have another $100,000 increase in 2016, and then one more increase in 2017. That will bring the general fund support to a total of $925,000. Then it kind of levels off, and we'll show you a graph on the next slide, that really we should be fully funded to maintain our park system. We just have to deal with inflationary pressures at that point. The other part, the Infrastructure Trust Fund does 10% of that. ITF levy does go to help support the Parks Capital Fund. And as you mentioned, Madam Mayor, development fees in 2014, we budgeted $150,000. We are not going to reach that.
So,
And-
Ms.
and-
Faulkner, where would you grab that money? I don't know. Newton is about the only place that,
We have lots of possibilities, Madam Mayor. It just depends on
who wants to develop what
And
the
if
developers
paid-
call those dogs?
and what incentives we may offer. So it's a combination of things that go into redevelopment.
Yeah, it's very difficult to predict when applications are going to come in. I think things have picked up, but I guess after working with Ms. Stry, we really feel like we should start lowering that expectation, and so we've dropped it to $100,000 for the next 5 years. And at some point, we'll probably want to even reduce it a little bit below that. But so we did.
Because the Minnesota River Quadrant, a lot of those already paid their
That's right.
their park dedication fees, even though because that's a redevelopment area, so it's not.
Correct. Do you want to
Just
talk
back
about?
up one moment. We did hand out to you at the beginning of the meeting a replacement page for fees and charges for those development fees or park dedication fees. Do you want to
Yeah,
talk about that just a bit?
Madam Mayor, council members, if you want to pull out that page and look at page 174, about halfway down, you will see the limited market value analysis for R1A, R1, R2. Does everybody see that section on page 174? And there's a 2014 column and a 2015 column. We have an appraisal done on those, a market value analysis done on all of those different types of zoning classes. And we just completed that. We didn't have those numbers at the time your budget book was prepared, so we wanted to let you know that this is a recent market value analysis. And you can see that the market is rebounding. Most of the zoning classes have an increase in value that we're proposing for 2015. Any questions about that? We had hoped to have that information in the books prior to it going out, but our appraiser retired and we had to find a new one.
Yeah.
Question.
Mary?
Thank you. Can you give me a little more explanation on these, the limited market value analysis? Is that the total property, the land and the structure on the land?
That is raw land value.
Raw
So
land.
They are doing a market value analysis
That's
on
what
raw land.
That's what I thought. So a lot in I think when we had at our last meeting, we had somebody wanted to divide a lot or subdivide a lot into two lots, and I remember you said this was forthcoming, and that was what I thought you meant was like a typical lot in Burnsville now would be in R1 single family residential would be $90,000.
That is the value for 1 acre of raw
Oh,
land.
1
So
acre of
You would
raw.
get 3 lots, maybe.
Oh, okay, per acre.
Yeah, and so they're assuming,
Okay.
they know what our square footage requirements are. They're assuming you're going to get 3 lots out of that. And so
Okay.
the value is set based on that. So they're really saying you'd get $35,000 for that lot. And I think that's
That's pretty.
very realistic. I mean, if you break it down that
I
way.
think that's probably
Oh,
underestimating, but that's okay.
But it is raw land without any improvements, just so.
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah. 35 is,
I think so. I mean, that's just an opinion, but
So we just wanted to let you know that we did
An
have
update.
an update to our market value analysis, and we've updated those numbers in the fees and charges schedule. Moving on, the Parks Capital Fund, source of funds, again, you'll see the 3 funding sources. General fund is in red, ITF in green, and then development fees is the small purple section at the end. And Kelly, I think 2015 should probably read $100,000. Or
We actually did still leave 2015 at the 150, but it was the out years that went to 100.
Okay, thank you. I would just note that in 2017 is kind of the last bump in the general funding increases, and then you kind of see the funding levels balance stay the same in 2018, 2019. And really, I feel like we'll be fully funded at that point. It's just dealing with inflationary increases, and we'll be able to maintain our park system. Upcoming highlights of expenditures, I would just point out that the projects in the next 5 years are mainly renovations. I'll point out a few exceptions. Some of the highlights for 2015, the Lac Lavon project, as council's aware, we delayed that. We're going to carry those funds forward and add some funding to that project. Staff would like to break that project into 3 contracts. We did one contract and bid it out, and we got quite high prices. I believe if we break it into 3 elements, we'll get better pricing. So we're going to have irrigation as one contract, we're going to have fencing as another, and then we're going to do the building as a separate contract. I think we'll get better pricing because we'll have irrigation people bidding the irrigation project, no general kind of tacking on fees on top of that. And so I think that'll help. We're also going to reduce the scope on this project. We mentioned on our field visit that we were looking at raising the outfield fences from 6 feet to 8 feet. We are not going to do that to save some dollars.
Yeah.
And so we're suggesting we take a look at how we can reduce the project scope.
Okay,
I
Bill?
mean, we haven't voted. I mean, part of that whole conversation was we're going to upgrade a bunch of fences because people didn't think they were as safe as they were when they built them, and part of that discussion, as I recall, was based on baseball versus softball, and there was discussion, which I assume it's still up for discussion, about if we tear down that building, will it be replaced? Will we put porta potties out versus building bathrooms? So this I assume is still in discussion, totally in discussion, and you're just putting it out this way tonight.
Councilmember Coughlin, council members, that's absolutely correct. I mean, this is part of the capital plan, but there is funding at least set aside in 2015 to do the irrigation work and the fencing work. What that will look like, that would come back before you in 2015. The building itself, we've postponed to 2016. That will give us a feel for how much these other renovations will cost that, at least in staff's mind, are higher priorities that we get them done. There are some safety issues with some of the fencing in the interior parts, if we want to use that facility for youth baseball tournaments.
Right, which would also be, I assume, part of the discussion.
Correct.
And that gives us time to have dialogue about what the building part of the facility could be. The fencing and the irrigation, we've got to replace some things that are breaking there, but the building itself, that's why we left it last, because it gives us a little time to develop ultimately where that needs to go.
And the other thing we're going to do is get these packages bid out as early as we can, give the contractors as much lead time
So we
as
have an
can,
understanding of what it
try and
is.
get better prices. So we're very confident we can do better than the number we got when we bid it out as one package. The other highlights for 2015, we do have some money to expand the parking lot by the Mel Johnson football field in Black Dog Park. That's been on our plan since 2008 when we started having problems. And the police chief and fire chief remind me continually that we need to get that fixed because we have people parking on both sides of the entryway and some
It's hard to
safety
get
issues.
out.
It's hard to get in and
If
out.
there's anything that happens down in that area, it's hard to get all those people out of there.
So we do feel like that's a priority that we need to address. There is money in the 2015 CIP to provide matching funds for the Lions Playground expansion, adding the splash pad. You may recall we got a $70,000 donation from the Lions to do that work. We did include in the CIP for 2015 the Rose Bluff Access Trail to the Kramer Nature Preserve. I believe council had some discussion about this earlier. That's connection from Williams Drive down into the Kramer Nature Preserve. That section of trail is part of a regional trail that the county has planned, the Lake Marion Regional Trail. And they have come to us and said we will pay $170,000 of the $190,000 that it will cost to put that section in. It's kind of one of those offers that's hard to turn down. It is also a local trail need that we have, and it's always beneficial to get the trails in before the homes are built if you can. And that's a new development that if we can get that trail section in, nobody will be surprised, even though it's on everybody's plan sheets, that there will be a trail along the backyard of some of those homes.
Mary?
So that means more people are going to come down to that beautiful park? Nobody goes there now except me.
Councilmember Sherry, you will have some company enjoying
no.
the beauty of the tamaracks.
Well, check on the tamarack
Yes.
trees, right? They were gorgeous this year, by the way.
And then the other project that kicks off in 2015 is the Black Dog Regional Trail. We've been talking about that a lot. We're actually going to start moving dirt in 2015 and do the west end and then complete the east end on 2016.
And that too is a partnership.
That is about a roughly $2.5 million project, and the city is paying about $400,000. So
I know, because we have great partners.
3 other agencies that
Yeah.
are contributing funds.
Yeah.
Federal
The
money.
state, federal.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife
Yeah.
Service, and Dakota County.
Yeah.
The other thing I would note is there's still, about $1.8 million that's in your CIP book of projects that we've delayed as we kind of postpone the funding increases, and that list is in your budget books. I won't go through all of those for you right now. We continue to look for community partners to help with funding some of those improvements also. So what it looks like if you put it on a chart is these are the total funding of city funds that would be spent by year, and there's 2 colors, green, and I hope that's orange. I'm colorblind, but you'll let me know if it's not orange. It is orange. Good. What is easy to see is that the bulk of our money is going to renovations, and the darker orange is improvements to the general park system. The lighter orange color is trail improvements. So under just the new improvements, dark orange, new things of the general park system, lighter orange trail system improvements. So you can see really the new stuff we're doing is trail projects, and the reason for that is we get partners to come to the table and pay for 80 to 90% of those projects.
And that helps with that trail master plan that's been in place since 1998?
Yeah, for council members who have been here for when we started that trail master plan, we never really came up with a
The funding.
mechanism. But we did say we'd go after as many grants opportunities
partners.
as we could to try and get it done. So we continue to work to do that, and we've had some success. So. So I would just say the new improvements that you see in the trails, again, are primarily funded through grants. Park capital sources and uses, revenues coming in, expenditures going out by year. And the key here is the purple line shows the fund balance, and it's staying fairly stable with this plan.
I would just like to mention too, the spike in 2015, the much taller line has to do with that, with those trails and the partners. So we are the managing project for the Black Dog Trail. So all of those federal monies and state monies are coming through us. So that's why the number is so high.
With that, I believe I'm turning it back to Ms. Strye.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. We'll move on to the Equipment, Vehicle, and Facilities Capital Fund. This is where we're running most of our fleet and larger equipment, and then improvements, maintenance, major maintenance kinds of things to our facilities through this fund. This fund, we keep the funding source from the mostly from the general fund at a steady level, but the fund itself allows us to have some flexibility between years as we're funding those things to keep the peaks and valleys out, but keeping a level tax levy. You recently have been on a tour of facilities, and there was a facilities study, the update that happened in 2014 that identified a lot of needs for the aging facilities that we have. Those were incorporated into this plan. The high needs, the high priority kinds of things have been incorporated into this plan. When we get to the next slide that shows the fund balances and the out years, you'll find that this fund does go into the negative with those highest priority needs even. So we do have some future work to do in this particular fund as we look at how are we going to fund those things and prioritize the needs. So the purple line is what I was referring to. So we have it balanced in 2015 and 2016, really taking that fund balance down to a very low level, but meeting the immediate needs. And in 2017, we're right at zero. But as we go out into 2018 and 2019, that would go negative with this plan. So without any changes in the future, we would not be able to afford those items.
Yeah.
You're going to go
Dan?
through the uses that you've got planned out for the next 5 years, like what's in the use column?
We
Or
don't
are you
have
gonna do?
we don't have a lot of specifics here. You want to chime in?
The uses in the next 5 years are, for the most part, just general maintenance of the existing facilities. We're not talking large expansions or renovations or anything. What you're seeing in the trend on the facility and equipment fund is our equipment fleet has been pretty stable in size for a while.
Yeah.
The fleet itself, we are undertaking an initiative in the next year and a half to do what we can to downsize as much as possible. The new fleet software that we have will allow us to look into the potential pooling vehicles, reducing vehicles that aren't getting the type of use that we need. But we're not going to be able to cure the whole fund by just making some savings on the fleet. What you're seeing kicking in is parking decks, parking ramps, facilities that we've built over the last 10 to 15 years that are starting to age and now need maintenance. But
Yep.
at the same time we built them, obviously
We knew.
you have priorities, and so we're starting to figure out how are we going to take care of those. And so what our plan next year is we're going to look top to bottom at the fund of our facilities and everything and come back to the council with kind of a comprehensive game plan for our facilities long term and make the decisions that we need to make about prioritizing equipment, facilities, and the things that we need and how we want to invest those dollars. And if we need more dollars than we ultimately come to, then we'll look at what are the options for funding those things. But realistically, we haven't had the luxury with the things that happened 3-4 years ago to put away money to anticipate those growth things that are going to start hitting the bottom line. And so that's where we're at. This is probably our top priority from a staff standpoint of facilities and CIP next year to get work through this with the council and get a good start on what is our long-term plan going to be and really prioritize things with you.
Well, it's like any family. You have a house, the roof is going to need to be repaired, furnace, and any of the equipment that you have in your house that runs the infrastructure of the house is going to need to be maintained and repaired, whether it's your air conditioning, and that's what we're doing here, or your driveway and all of that. This is just a much bigger house with a whole lot more stuff to take care of.
And a big part of this too is when we're going to be bringing you a facilities plan in the near future. We'll be talking about the fire study, what that looks for us long term. Those pieces fill in. A lot of our short term or our 5-year needs are at Fire Station 1. Depending on what we do with Fire Station 1, that changes the expenditure and what we're doing there. So
Fire
some of those
Station
needs,
1 goes all the way back to the early 70s, if not late 60s,
and we've got renovation issues at the police station. So there's a lot. It's a big picture, and we still have some of the pieces before we start making some of the decisions and recommendations and working through it with the council. So that's going to be, like I said, our big task that we're going to be focused on. We feel pretty comfortable with our other 15-year plans. We've got the items identified. We've got the funding strategy. We'll talk a little bit about streets at your all-day work session, but that's a matter of how much do we want to spend on collectors versus neighborhoods and stuff. It's not the funding shortfall that this has with new assets coming into the picture.
Councilmember Keeley, to address your question, on page 131, I believe that says, yes, 131, is a very detailed list of this particular fund. It's a 2-page list, breaking down by area of what is planned for that particular fund over the next 5 years.
I'm using the electronic version. It's taking me a while to get up to 130.
This slide shows where the funding sources come from for this particular fund, and we are PAYGO on this, so we're not issuing any. We have no planned issuance of debt. That is always an option that could go in there, but.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
just a reminder for those watching, the pages that Ms. Dry is referring to and that we referred to are all those in the budget workbook that are online.
It's
so everyone
online,
can
yes.
reach this information through our website.
Yeah.
So sorry for the interruption, Ms. Dry.
No, that's a good reminder to all folks. It is online. What we're looking at right here in our books is what they can access online.
That's correct.
That's a good reminder, Heather. Thank you.
So the majority of the funding for the equipment, vehicle, and facilities fund does come from the general fund. So that is a transfer of property taxes, really, is what it is. And when we look at those property tax pressures and the things that are driving the increases in the property tax, we do have factored in an inflationary type increase every year from the general fund. So this plan already has those kinds of increases in it and is still at that point. The other red piece, that little sliver in there, that is the LGA that has been dedicated to capital. So the about 50,000 every year.
Well, you're factoring it for 5 years. You're very optimistic that we'll still get it. It's okay.
And if we don't, then that does create an additional
Another pressure.
But and the reason for putting that in this fund is that these are one-time kinds of expenditures in a way. So it's a way to put that aside for something with that kind of priority. There's little slivers that come from the utility funds if some of the items are related to them, and then any of the funds that we receive when we sell or trade in equipment and vehicles do go back into this fund. So it continues to fund itself. That's our orange piece there at the end. We are conservative in those estimates as we go out to. We've been pleasantly surprised with some of those in recent years as we're able to get the most we can from the vehicles that we have. The split on what we have planned expenditures between vehicles and equipment and facilities can be seen here. The purple being the vehicles and equipment. 2017, I think that's a fire-related vehicle or one large vehicle.
Yeah, it's what you'll see, Council, for the most part, we're about a $1.1 to $1.2 million a year is what we spend on vehicles. That's kind of our ongoing long-term bottom line. When you see a spike, it's typically replacement of a fire truck.
That's what I was thinking when I saw that.
About those, remembering fire trucks range anywhere from $500,000 to nearly $1 million, depending on the vehicle.
Yeah.
And so that's a significant hit when we have one of those, and that's when you'll see the spike. So we try to manage them, but sometimes with the larger trucks, we can't avoid the spike. The reality is the shortfall in funding is really related to the newer facilities coming online. We've always had a couple $100,000 dedicated to the upkeep of facilities, but now you add facilities on top of those existing ones, and that's where we're going to have to look at making up for the shortfall.
Moving on to the IT Capital Fund, unless anybody has questions regarding that. This is similar to the equipment and vehicle fund, except it's just IT related. And some of the items this year that are causing or some of the bigger items that are more unusual, we have a little bit of a peak in our replacement and additions in infrastructure and PC computers. And there's some fire computer equipment that's planned for in 2015, and some security systems upgrades rather. I apologize, those are some pretty small lettering on there, but the blue represents the actual PC computers, laptops, all the devices and that sort of thing, and then the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, to run those within the city. So you can see that is a big portion in the IT equipment fund. Software development being the red piece, another piece that happens annually as we spread that out. Public safety, it has a large portion of large IT demand usage. And then the purple is kind of a combination of systems in all other areas, including finance, recreation, community development, those kinds of things.
Mary?
Kelly, on the public safety use funds, in the 2014 budget, there was quite a jump over what was originally budgeted and then what was actually spent. What was going on there? I refreshed my memory. I'm sure it came across our...
One of the things with the IT capital is that the timing of the actual improvement or purchase does vary quite a bit. So a lot of times we are carrying forward something from a prior year. So they may have planned to do an item in a previous year. They decided not to because of some upcoming technology changes or something that wasn't meeting the needs, or they delayed that sort of thing. So it got carried forward to the previous year. The specific, off the top of my head, I don't recall, but we certainly can get that information back to you.
Yeah.
Dana, you have that?
Councilmember Sherry, Madam Mayor, one of the specific items was the delay in the voicemail upgrade and the email upgrade to Office 365. Because the Office 365 was coming online, the prices were coming down per license. We were working with Microsoft in order to secure better pricing for the licensing through a newly created government tier. So because of the developing information, we delayed that project. And that will be starting here late, but most of that money will be in 2015.
The carry forward.
It is a carry forward.
The carry forward.
Were you
But
thinking?
why wasn't this anticipated then in the original budget
Councilmember Sherry,
for 2014?
it's the licensing piece, the new development piece that caused the delay.
I think I might be able to answer
I'm
that.
still not
Council-
quite there.
Sherry. We budget on an annual basis, and then at the end of the year, if it is going to be carried forward, those aren't included in what you're looking at here. That we bring to you in a separate action, a budget amendment action. So you'll see a lot of those at the beginning of the year, where we say requesting to spend this money that was unspent last year, carry this project forward.
Okay, yeah, all right, that helps.
And I remember when Tom Venables presented in a department presentations, he talked about sometimes some of the things that they budget, and because of new technology, they delay it so they can get better decision with the new technology, and or else the licensing, so they delay it until it comes online. At least that's what I understood from his presentation then. And those were some of the innovations that they were looking at in leveraging their dollars.
Okay.
So at the end of any given year, if they haven't spent it, then the fund balance in this particular fund then grows that amount, by that amount. So when we are asking you to carry forward, we're asking to use that fund balance that grew because we didn't spend it.
Not spent.
We're spending it the next year. So it's not an additional levy for the upcoming year, which is why we typically don't include it as we're looking at it here.
Okay, thank you.
Something similar, though, on Parks Capital, we did make an
Release something.
exception to that rule in how we normally present it this year. If you're looking back at the Parks Capital 5-year plan, we did add a column for carry forward, and we did that specifically for the Lac Lavon project because it was very clear that we weren't going to spend that very large chunk of money. So as you're looking at it, there's another column there that shows a carry forward. We thought it provided just a little bit of extra information.
I think that would help in this area too, frankly.
For IT,
Well, I mean, anytime you're going to have a big
carry
surge,
forward, yeah.
or what appears to be a surge, let's put it that way.
It would be somewhat difficult to do that early in the budget process because they're still making those kinds of decisions. So as we're accumulating this in September, October timeframe, they still may not have made those decisions. We could probably identify some of them, but not all of them.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sherry, what we might be able to do is make a note of this, and then next year when we come back to do this presentation, we might think about adding a slide for just the IT capital, because at this point in time in November, we have a good sense of it. I think what you're hearing Ms. Tri say is, we just, for the June, it's just, we're only halfway through the year, and so when we start preparing some of these, and even in July, so what we can do is we can make a note so that for something like IT that changes so much toward the
Okay,
end
that
of
would
the
help,
year,
yeah.
we'll bring it back and have some sort of a carry forward slide.
Yeah.
And not only that, if it's just reflected in a narrative, because I read all of that stuff, the narrative
That would
just
help.
talks a little bit more about that. That would
Yeah,
be good.
address it somewhere, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think that this could, it certainly confused me, so I think that would confuse others.
Okay.
Many.
So the IT capital fund, at this point in time, you can see the fund balance is growing. Another unique thing about the IT capital fund is that it's very difficult to look out 5 years with technology.
Yeah.
So
Changes every day.
So there is as the funding source is a certain level, the red line being the projected expenditures, those tend to be the annual costs that remain very steady. There's a difference between those two that can be used as we get every year as we update this plan or come closer, that is available for new technology as needed. And that would be brought to you in your budget process in the more current years versus the out years. So then we're moving on to the enterprise funds. These are the funds where user fees are paying for most of the costs. That is the idea, is that the fees are charged out to the people that are using the services. Our largest enterprise fund is the Water and Sewer Fund. Total enterprise funds are $35.9 million. The water and sewer being the largest of that is almost 70%, 69% of that. And then stormwater management fund at 18%. And then you can see the other items being a smaller portion, the Ice Center Golf Course and the Ames Center, and then the really small street lighting and sidewalk snow plowing for order of magnitude. And are we turning it over to you, Steve? I think the water and sewer.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, so when we talk water and sewer fund, we've got some pretty large assets that are in that fund. We've got 250 miles roughly of sewer and water main in town that are covered in that fund, along with the production facilities, the distribution facilities, and then the collection facilities. And then another big part of the sewer fund is we don't treat our sewage. We take it to a point, and then the Met Council treats it. So the Met Council adds a charge on top of what we charge to our residents also. When we look at the water and sewer fund, we've had a long-term plan for the last several years that does include a 4.5% increase, and we've been pretty steady with those. the good news is we're getting through our big projects. We're going to be tackling the water treatment plant in 2017 and 2018. 2017 and 2018, and then after that, it's water main reconstruction, rehabilitation of water mains. The good news is that's focused primarily on the cast iron pipe water mains that were constructed in the 60s that we have failure issues in Burnsville with, and then the concrete water mains that were constructed in the early 70s, which were only used for a few years before they decided it wasn't a great idea to make water mains out of concrete. And so the good news is we will have opportunities to line some of those water mains. The larger concrete ones are ideal for the type of lining projects we're talking about. So we're hopeful that we can see the edge of the bubble on the water. We get out into the mid-2020s, and we start to see the pressure from the water main replacement dropping off. And that's a huge component of what we're paying for right now.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. And then also on top of that, you've got a 1.5% increase by the Met Council for the treatment of sewage that's going on. The Water and Sewer Fund, as we were just touching on, we've got aging and water production facilities. Once we complete that upgrade of the plant will be very good for another 30 to 40 years. So we kind of go through that bubble, then we have that period that we will be in pretty good shape on the plant. That's the big thing. And then obviously our meter replacement, which we've touched on, that's the critical infrastructure that collects the revenues and helps us provide the service to the residents and the businesses. Capital improvement funding, that's part of that 5-year plan and those projects. And so while we are increasing at 4.5%, as I said, we do see out into the future, because we are looking 15 to 20 years out, that we will be able to at some point be able to moderate that when we catch up with the bubble that we're seeing in the water and sewer side of things too, specifically the water side.
Yeah, Dan?
Mr. Albrecht, you noted the water treatment plant and the capital improvement, the rehabilitation, et cetera, et cetera. Is that, you noted 17 and 18, and I noticed the public works projects water, $4 million in 2017, $7.5 million in 2018, but there's also $9 million in 2015. Where is that?
The $9 million is our meter project, so that's the large meter project. And then in 2016, we actually start doing some initial parts of the water plant. 2017 and 18 are the big capital bonding years for the water plant. And so it's spread out over a period of years. When we do the water plant, it's basically a 2-part plant, and we can only do half of it at a time because we have to maintain water to the public. So we have redundancy in the plant. So we'll do half of it in 1 year and half of it in the next year.
Okay.
And if you remember, and you can correct me if I'm not remembering what I heard, on the meters, to your point where you always want to make sure that we have great technology, all of the meter replacement are going to be something where they will be using technology. And
My recollection is over time, we capture 250,000 a year, whatever that loss is.
with all the losses
We'll
that we
touch on that real quickly, and then just jumping back, the other piece of the water plant that needs to be replaced is we have about $2 million worth of generators that run the water plant. And if you're familiar with the location of the water plant, it is in the Excel territory. And when the power goes out, it doesn't mean that people throughout the city, because most of the cities in Dakota Electric territory, they still use water in the part that the power's out in. And so we still have to deliver water to, and so we'll be upgrading those generators. Are also 30-plus years old. The new generators will allow us to take advantage of some increased savings tiers. So that whole facility will be upgraded over that 3-year period.
And we will realize a lot of savings. And I remember when I came into office, we had people with the little cards picking up and you had to mail in your cards. Do you remember, Mary?
Yeah, related.
And then we went to the meters where then they can scan it from the road. Now this is going to be something that can be done right here.
We won't have to have any more drive-by scanning. As we said, that'll be a 2-year project starting. Actually, we'll be talking to you about the project in December if the budget is approved, starting that project over a 2-year period. Again, that's 17,000 units that need to be replaced, so it's a significant undertaking. And we will be moving forward with that project. What you have in chart in front of you is the goal with this project is that our meter system be self-sustaining from this point on, that we don't have to bond for it again or do those things. And so we're implementing a meter charge that basically is the cost of what your meter in the unit is to you. And you're paying it off to the city over a 20-year period, and that's why we're dividing up. But what we're looking at is, you mentioned, we're right now losing several $100,000s a year in revenue because our meters are getting old and slowing down. We expect to recapture that revenue within 2 years when the project is done. That money is being put back into this program to thereby pay down the rates that people are paying for the water meter charge, because they're helping pay for it. We want them to benefit because that's what it's for. It's for the water meter collection system. So when we talk about the funding plan includes future revenues recapture, that's what we're talking about, is putting those revenue recaptures right back into that funding plan for those meters.
That can all be managed in-house rather than having somebody driving around.
When we were out. Out in the neighborhoods, saw the little car driving around up and down the streets. It was pretty funny. It's almost like the Google map car with a camera on it, just driving around, seeing the same car going up and down the streets. Question, when we did the facilities tour and the water treatment plant, of what we saw that needed rehabilitation, is that covered in this CIP?
Yep.
So that part of our bonding assets, I don't know what you call it, we call it the bonding bus tour or whatever we called it, but that area of what we saw is in this plan.
It's funded and in the CIP, that's correct. That facility is covered by the water and sewer utility.
Sure.
So it is funded as part of the program. Our conversation about facilities issues won't touch on that because we've got that programmed and ready to be done.
So it wasn't a surprise.
No,
that
we've
we
known.
needed to.
The initial study started 7-8 years ago on that project, and so it's been on our radar for 7-8 years. It's really picking a time, and it's a significant project. And when we talk about, just because something's 37 years old doesn't mean we replace it. We actually looked at the metal thickness of those central towers, and we've been monitoring that yearly to see how it's degrading, so that we can project what is the year we need to do this, because catastrophically, we can't have our water plant shut down, but we need to be proactive, and so we do that with all our assets. As we have kind of a life expectancy, and then we moderate and monitor it, and now we know 2017, 2018 is the right time to do that project before we start having issues with the water plant.
Mary?
Well, as long as I've been on council, it's now been 6 years, I know that there's been talk of renovating that plant, so, no, it wasn't a surprise. I just want to compliment you, which I did when we talked about this before, for squeezing as much life out of this equipment and this plant and equipment that you do. And just like Terry, I don't want Terry to get all the credit now for doing with parks, but Steve does it with the infrastructure as well. And so thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, because the other thing is that the transition to the new system, because that was an old system that was back from the 70s, and didn't we replace it about, 4 years ago? When
System as far as
the computer system over at the water plant?
Water plant.
The SCADA?
the SCADA. Oh, the SCADA system. Yes, we've been upgrading that, and we have a state-of-the-art SCADA. For the public, SCADA is what we use to operate our system. We have a plant of our type. We don't have people there all the time, and that's to the benefit of our ratepayers, is we don't have to have employees there all the time. Our employees can run and operate the water plant from their homes, and they can diagnose any issue in our water system from their homes. They can make many of the repairs from their homes, too, via our SCADA system that we're talking about, and that's inclusive of our stormwater systems, our water utility, our sanitary sewer utility, and so that's a real cost savings to the city that we invested in that, and the fiber optic backbone that ties all those utilities together too. So that's a significant thing. And I would tell the council the same approach we take with our parks and our public works facility. It's the facilities are next in line for that approach, and that'll be the same approach. We'll look at how can we maximize, get the most life out of things, and then come back to you with a refined plan. We know we have an issue, but we don't want to get into details because we still need to digest what can we extend, what can't we extend. So.
And the value of having this conversation for our citizens who are watching and really trying to understand. To your point, Mr. Albrecht, we have great staff here who really do a great job of managing the asset and really watching to see at what point do we do the repair work or the replacement work. We just say, they don't just say, okay, it needs to be replaced because it is now 35 years old. You do an analysis of it. And if we can squeeze 2 more years out of that, we do that. And then, but it is in the plan, so we do understand that we need to replace it. And so that's the same thing with the SCADA system, and now with some of the replacement, because you've done an analysis of the thickness of the whatever it's
and I
called.
think it's important for the public to understand we pick different methods to fund these projects too. Some people may say, well, why didn't you 7 years ago start setting aside money? Well, when we look at the amount of money that need to be raised,
Yes.
it didn't make sense rate-wise to raise it through rates. These are 30, 40-year assets. Bonding and interest rates are a very good method to go when you're looking at an asset that's going to last that long. And so we try to develop the best financial strategy with the finance department for tackling each individual, because we do get the question, well, why? I mean, we can't put away enough money for $500 million worth of assets, so we have to use a variety of tools. ITF is great for our streets. Our water fund is great for our baseline repairs, but when it's these spike repairs, we do use bonding to massage out those spikes and utilize rates.
Yeah. Ms. Johnston.
And I just can't help myself, but this is another benefit of long-term financial planning. A really good credit to Steve is that he has been working very hard to take all of the different plans under his areas of responsibility, and instead of looking out 5 or 10 years, we're looking out 20 and 30 years.
Yeah.
And that you can't sort of manage some of these spikes without doing that kind of a thing, especially when you're talking about such large assets. So.
Yeah. So, and I just want to make sure that our people are watching, because sometimes how reporters report on things don't understand, and how the deep dive into all of these issues. We try to talk about them, we try to let people know about them, and that it is looking out 20 years. We're always working on 5-year plans, but our staff works out on 20 years, and we do have a policy that when we do invest, that we have to make sure that the life of it, I think it's 50%, by a third of the life we're drawing down on the principal, on a policy. Okay, I read it. It's in the background. So, but I want people to know that we do have a policy and how we look at all of these, and how the funding is, and how we draw down on all of it.
Yeah, and Madam Mayor, you're talking about the fund balance policy,
Yes.
and absolutely you're correct. And it is a
And how
credit
we
to the
pay for
council
all
that
this stuff.
you all have been very making sure, holding our feet to the fire on all of our financial policies, and also looking at 5 years. You would be surprised at how many cities don't look 5 years ahead. And so it's a credit to you all for making sure we continue to do
Yeah,
that.
and when we do make these investments, we want to know that we're paying down the principal on the life of the investment before it reaches its life.
Exactly. We'll jump ahead to Stormwater Fund. Stormwater Fund, $6.5 million next year. It funds system maintenance. We clean things. We take care of our stormwater system. Stormwater system is one of those things that you don't think about until there's water rising in your backyard or there's issues like that. And so it's a very critical system. We also preserve water quality. Terry's group does a phenomenal job of not only protecting the environment, but we've been very successful in reestablishing natural environments and bringing up the quality of our lakes. And we do have a unique, beautiful environment here in Burnsville, and so this fund is one of the frontline funds that helps preserve that. We also support improvements, as I said, in the Water Resource Management Plan. Just roughly going through this on a rate overview, we do collect every property in town, and people wonder sometimes, well, why do I pay a stormwater fee? This money is used to treat the runoff that comes from the city to the Minnesota River, and everybody in town uses our roadways and our different facilities in town. We are obligated by law to treat that water and take care of that water. So even if you live on a rural lot on a small road, there is a component that you participate, and then we all participate on the bigger roadways, the county roads. The county doesn't pay for 100% of county roads in Burnsville. Burnsville pays for 45% of everything related to county road infrastructure, and I think people forget that. So that has to be split up amongst all of our taxpayers, and so this fund helps fund those portion contributions. And as you can imagine, county roads generate a lot of stormwater. They generate a lot of treatment requirements too. And so people are confused sometimes about why they would pay this stormwater credit if they live on a small lot that doesn't really generate a lot of stormwater. It's related to the facilities that we all own jointly. Again, the city has been very diligent on this fund, and what we've been pleased, again, this year is no increase, again, for the rates in this fund. We continue to be pretty shrewd with our outlying investments. The city has gotten up ahead of the bubble on stormwater, and now we can flatten that fund out. And even though we do project nominal 1% increases, the last couple of years, those 1% have gone to zero when we get to the long-range fund. And so the good news there is, well, I think we used to be at the top in stormwater fees. We're slowly coming down to the middle of the pack, and we'll continue down because you've invested. We now are positioned to dictate what we do investment-wise rather than be reactive on the stormwater side. So this is a good success story for the city, I think.
And another thing for our citizens to understand, because of this, we have really restored the health of our lakes, especially taking some of those lakes off the impaired list, like Early Lake. And that is because of this system that helps us throughout the whole city. And then the water we discharge back into the Minnesota River is clean, and it helps our aquifers. Yeah, Mary.
I have a question on a line, and this would be on page 99, the Stormwater Fund. In the source of funds, and you have non-operating, there's a huge jump in the 2015 budget. This would be for other. So it's the second line from the bottom on this, that first section. So you have total non-operating sources, and then the one up above it is other. Why is that so big? Do you see what the one I'm talking about?
Yep.
I do.
Yep.
What page are you on again?
Is that the
It's 99. 99.
Stormwater
And it's
fund.
other financial information is what you're looking at, Mary?
Stormwater Fund, five-year
Yeah.
financial
Yeah.
plan.
To jump from 20.
I believe, and Terry doesn't have his book in front of him, but we're doing the Keller Lake project next year, and we have a grant paying for part of that project, do we not, Terry, as a revenue source?
We're hoping to, yes.
Yeah, and so that would be part of that increase in other would be that funding source.
I like it when we get a lot more.
So
other-
part of that is we're leveraging our projects for that, and so that shows that as part of the funding
Okay.
source for that project. So that's under other, and that's why other would jump so dramatically
Yeah.
in a 1 year. We don't get grant funding every year we get small funding, but nothing significant like
Yeah,
that project
okay.
is aiming for. So
You
Yeah,
don't
that-
see 1,526% increase.
Yeah, that kind of caught my eye.
yeah, it's not related to rates; it's related to
No, it's their
grant.
income, yeah, and the other not rates, so, thank you.
And again, we fund our aging system. We also are managing our water quality and meeting. Again, this is something that we don't necessarily get to set the tone for what the rules are. These are mandates from the federal government and the state on water quality and discharge. And so this fund, more as much as any fund, deals with things that we are out of our control. We're told this lake is now impaired. You need to treat this water.
Yeah.
You're now discharging to an impaired water body. Fix it, Burnsville. We're not getting, there's no funding that comes along with the fix-it mandate. And so
Funded mandate?
the good news is, again, the city's positioned itself to be able to manage those mandates in this fund. And so that's been a lot of planning that's gone into that.
Steve is absolutely correct. It was $399,000 on the Keller Lake project that would be included on that.
Thank you.
Streetlight fund. We've always had this fund. The council's been very proactive for the last 4 years in this fund. People forget we've got nearly 4,000 streetlights in town, a third of which the city of Burnsville owns and maintains and operates, the rest of which we lease, essentially. So we kind of are on the rent-to-own program from Dakota Electric and Xcel Energy. It's a great racket, and we're going to be on it for a while because it's kind of financially disincentivized for us to take over it the way they've got their system set up. And so we use this fund to replace lights, to take care of the lights. We all know how critical our major roadway lighting is at our intersections along our major county roads. And so this fund funds those expenditures. Fee overview, again, no increase proposed. The council has been putting away money for several years in this fund, and we've now been able to guide our needed improvements and project them out for a considerable number of years. We do show projected increases in the future at 3%. That's related to what we get charged for energy increases annually. But the last couple of years, we've been able, again, to take this one back to zero by adjusting our projects and being shrewd with the money that we spend this on. Lighting projects, by identifying our critical lighting systems and keeping those up to speed, we're not held to, oh my gosh, we've got to replace this year. It allows us to space things out in budget as long as we keep intersections and critical lighting up to speed. Our neighborhood lighting, we get good life out of those. Most of the neighborhoods, the lights are 30, 40 years old in those neighborhoods. So this asset lasts a long time when it's installed. In 2015, again, we spend roughly in the $170,000 to $200,000 range every year in this fund. And so 2016 to 2019, we try to stay very steady. You'll see the fund balance creeps up very gradually. Again, that's with 1% increases, which right now, 0 this year, unless there's a major change, probably be able to, or 3% increases, I'm sorry. That's why you're seeing that fund balance go up. We expect that unless we have a major energy increase, we'll still be able to absorb those within the existing range.
And you're making changes to LED with some of the
Yep.
lights when you're making
And that actually
replacements. So
helps
that
the
puts
fund. That's driving
yeah.
down our costs, and so that's helping us maintain things. And the city's made a significant, the new LED lights are going up on Civic Center Parkway right now. Those lights were 30 to 40 years
Yeah.
old along
Yeah.
there. You'll see some new ones, and those are all LED. Those will pay for themselves in 5 years. So, and they last another 25 years. So
Yeah.
that's a very good value for the city. Sidewalk snow plowing fund. I won't get too into this other than touch on the details. We talked extensively about this in August. We enhanced our service a little bit in that we want to meet our baseline needs. And what that meant is this is a small fund, so anytime you add $10,000 to the fund, it shows a pretty dramatic increase. But our residential per foot prices are very low. We're still, you're under $13, $14 a year to have your sidewalk removed for the entire year. That's a pretty incredible value. We will be contracting. What you'll see in the fund is we do a 3-year contract. So we contract for 3 winters at a time. So our rates stay flat for 3 winters, and then in 2016, 2015-16, we'll be recontracting. So you'll see it step up again, and then it'll flatten out. And again, this fund is very much driven by Mother Nature. We've had years where our expenditures are half of the fund's budget, and we've had years where they're twice as much, like this year, of the fund's budget. And so we try to be down the middle with the expenditures in this fund. And so that's the approach that we have for this fund. So you'll see our fund balance is pretty flat in this fund. We're trying to increase those revenues again a little bit, and that's to pay for the equipment that the city still has to maintain to keep that level of service. And then I'll turn it over for the Ice Center Fund. I'll turn it back over to Ms. Stry.
Okay. Are you going
And
to
she's going
take
to turn
it?
it over to Terry Schultz.
Can I have this one?
You may.
Thank you, Mr. Albrecht. I'm going to talk briefly about the Ice Center Fund with both operating expenses and capital expenses. It's $1.2 million in 2015. I do want to point out that we have a very successful operation at the Ice Center. A lot of Ice Centers struggle to cover their operating costs. We cover our operating costs, plus we contribute $100,000 in revenues towards capital expenses. For the most part, we can cover our capital expenses unless there's a big ticket item, and then we do have to issue bonds for that.
Yeah.
Council, you may recall we had to renovate the
Yeah.
entire refrigeration system, and we had to bond for that.
Yeah.
But generally, we cover our operating expenses, and then we have another $100,000 that we can put towards capital investments for the facility. There are some significant capital expenditures that are anticipated in the 5-year plan. I will point out a few of those. The biggest one is the replacement of the roof, which is an expensive item, and that is scheduled for 2018. You will see that on the graph that I show on the next slide. We will need to look at financing that through bonds to accomplish that project. The other thing we have coming up is in 2017, we need to replace the bleachers in the main rink. And in 2015, we are going to be doing some updates to our software over there, and really to try and maximize our energy savings that we can get out of the geothermal system. Believe it or not, technology really advances quickly. It's a computerized system, and so it's 5 years old.
5 years old.
Yep, at this point. And so there's new software that can improve the efficiencies on the system over there, and we'll bring that back to council and talk more about that. But we think we can get another $30,000 in energy savings by making an investment in that software. So the sources and uses, sources are, the revenues are in green, and the uses, expenditures are in orange, and the blue line, or purple line, I'm sorry, represents the cash balance, and of course you can see where the uses are higher than the And the revenues coming in 2017, that's the bleacher project, and then 2018 is that roof project. So that is a challenge that we'll have to do some planning for as we get closer to 2018. I'm going to turn next to the golf course. Another very successful operation. Mr. Hill is our golf course manager, does a wonderful job.
A beautiful job out there.
And the budget for that is $292,000. This fund is projected to be stable over the next 5 years, and we will have sufficient cash built up to pay for capital improvements, and there's a fairly large one, $160,000 for the parking lot replacement in 2016. And again, that will all be covered by revenues that we've taken in over the years at Burnham Wood Golf Course.
That's
We
a
do
wonderful, I apologize, Mr. Schultz. That's for a city-owned golf course. This is really a tremendous.
gem.
Sorry. I know that in the control room they hate it when we lean back that far.
Yeah.
That's a great success story to not only cover the overhead costs, the operating costs, but bank money for capital improvements in a public-owned golf course. I don't think I've ever heard any story anywhere remotely close to that around the cities, and what we've read stories of other cities with their public-owned golf courses and what they're doing with them, and the cost, the losses, and ultimately, in some cases, selling them for development. This is tremendous, and I do think it has everything to do with you and your staff and Dan, he's out there pulling weeds, mowing. Pulling weeds and mowing. I mean, he's
And planting beautiful flowers out there.
Unbelievable work ethic. That man is incredible. I drive by there. That's my route back and forth to work, so I see him out. And whenever I see somebody working, 99 out of 100 times, it's him, not someone else, that's doing something in a maintenance capacity on the course. He's just a tremendous, tremendous asset.
Thank you, Councilmember Keeley. Mr. Hill does deserve much of the credit, and of course the staff that he works with. I just want to point out that despite a late opening and poor weather at the start of 2014, you may recall we set records for rainfall in June, and that's never good for a golf course operation. But we still were able to exceed our expenses and generate some extra revenue and increase our rounds. We're just under 21,000 rounds, and then we were up over 2013 by about 300 to 350 rounds. So,
fantastic.
When we do our projections for budget purposes, just so you understand, we kind of assume average weather. We haven't had average weather for the last 2 years. I'm sure it will happen at some point, won't it, Kelly?
Hopefully it's not the new average.
Yes.
That's what we,
So then this graph just again shows again the sources for the revenues in the green and in the expenses in the orange, and the purple line is the cash balance. So despite that parking lot project in 2016, we still have a cash balance in the fund. So. With that, I believe I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Stride to start the Ames Center, and then I'm going to finish it.
okay. We have $2.4 million in the Ames Center. The naming rights are included, $100,000 annually. That began in 2014, so that is in our operations part. We do have the annual capital needs included in the 5-year plan, but we don't have any future major capital needs projected out in the 5-year plan. It's a fairly new building, so we haven't come up to that point yet. This is the first graph I am showing you is the operations. So this is the rental of the building and all of the things going on in that, and the expenses related to operating. And you can see that the revenues are not quite as large as the operating expenses, but that is actually an improved from the original projections, significantly improved. And as you look out, the purple line represents the net operating loss. As you look out towards 2019, it is a minus 62,000, which is much better than had originally been planned by that point in time. So that is good news for the facility. If you look at all sources and uses, and this includes transfers in, host fee revenue, and then transfers out for debt service, the revenues exceed operating, and I see I didn't change the title of my bars there, but it's total revenues exceed total expenses. So the purple line being above zero when we're looking at all revenues in this fund and all expenses. You talk about the
Thank you,
angel
Ms.
fund?
Stry. Councilmember Keeley, you had requested when we did the department presentations in October for an update on the Angel Fund. And so we added this slide in response to that.
Thank you.
So a quick summary, the Angel Fund was created in 2011, and we have sponsored 20 shows since then, and these numbers
Huge increase.
are through September, yeah. Contributions that have come in into the Angel Fund through community groups, and then we had the EDA that matched those contributions up to $50,000. But through 2014, that's $104,000 that we had in contributions. We have generated revenue for the AIM Center. So when we look at each production, if there's excess revenues over expenses, the first thing we do is pay ourselves rent. And so that first number, the rental and fee income, is to say those 20 shows generated $50,000 in rental income to the facility that, but for the Angel Fund, we may not have seen.
Yeah.
And then the next line is the Angel promotion income of $19,000. So those are revenues over the rent that are left over that we put back into the Angel Fund. So we have a balance now of $123,500 in the Angel Fund. So it has grown over that roughly 4-year period
Excellent.
by about $20,000.
Thank you. Is there can you give an overview of what that fund balance generally fluctuates to? I mean, as all of these funds that we've looked at, there's an ending, balance, but throughout the year, it can go up and down, obviously, as we collect revenues and we're handling expenses. Does this Angel Fund fluctuate much from what you know?
The Angel Fund is actually within the enterprise fund, the Performing Arts Center Enterprise, the AIM Center Enterprise Fund. And we only draw down on it if we have a show where the expenses exceed the revenues, and occasionally that does happen. So that's the purpose of the Angel Fund, is to provide a source for covering losses.
It's really not. We're not really putting out any money. We're just covering if it's
Yes.
a loss
If
and
there's a loss.
adding if it's it's really an insurance cushion.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's right.
Yep.
It's a cushion. If
So-
you remember when we put it together, then that was
When they project the shows, they project kind of a worst case scenario on the shows, or what they think might be the worst case. So when they're setting a season of shows, and we want to make sure that doesn't exceed the balance of the Angel Fund. So that's the maximum amount of risk that we would want to take on those kind of shows. They don't generally plan for that much risk, but it provides that ability
Right.
to have a show that doesn't do as
Right.
well.
It's financial backing, so they will take a little risk, and
Right.
so far the risk has paid off. Risk has paid off at
Yeah.
$69,000.
Yeah.
In
And you look at the fund balance, they've been doing pretty good to have that kind of money
Yep.
sitting there.
so making some good decisions.
Additionally, we have budgeted out in 2016 through 2019 to pay back the EDA fund $10,000 a year on the part that they have contributed to that. So
Wonderful.
it's gotten to that point where the
making
risk
money.
level can
Yeah,
be
out of the
funded by
fund.
the
Sure.
contributions.
Fantastic. Plan is working.
Yeah. And you know what? There's a lot of folks who say that they want to contribute to the Angel Fund. I said, great. And they have. There's some businesses in town who are doing that.
Excellent.
Okay. Moving on to debt. At the end of 2014, we would have we'll have approximately $58 million of debt outstanding, and as you can see the different areas. It's a mixed bag of things. The AIM Center debt at 24% of the debt, special assessments 25%, and utilities 26%. We do have some tax increment debt, and the ICE Center renovation is another 7% and a small amount left on the maintenance facility. This is just a historical perspective on the debt. You can see we've been pretty steady. In 2008 was when we added the AIM Center debt, and we've been pretty steady and project to be pretty steady on going out. Debt service, we have a little bit of an increase this year, and that has to do with the 5 and 13 interchange debt coming online. So you can see in the debt service fund, we have some for the ICE Center, $250,000 annually. This is the levy, and maintenance facility is another $285,000, and then we have street improvements. The ITF fund, there was 1 year, as we referred to earlier, where we issued debt instead of
because
the levy.
Because we didn't levy.
So that is an annual amount that's being paid out of the ITF fund. And then we always talk about the pledge of the use of general fund balance for the ICE Center debt. We are not levying that, but rather using $140,000 annually to cover the debt on the ICE plant renovation. To answer a question that Councilmember Keeley had at our last meeting, where we are in comparison to some of our other cities, one of the ratios that we put in our workbook on the debt section is our comparison of outstanding debt to tax capacity.
Yeah. But look at the debt service to capacity.
Yeah, tax capacity really provides, this ratio provides an order of magnitude. It's a comparison, generally speaking, this isn't a comparison that's done between cities, but rather one that you do to see where you are, where the city is, relative to where they've been. And tax capacity provides a measure of growth in the city, or so we're comparing sort of apples to apples a little bit on, as we grow, we might expect our debt to grow as well. So normally we're comparing ourselves to our tax capacity.
And we're an aging community, and and built out.
So we did, in response to your question, go out and do some calculations for other cities on that, and you can see that we're on the lower side or the middle end of that as far as outstanding debt to tax capacity. There are a lot of factors that go into this that might make this a little squishy comparison, but at least it gives you sort of order of magnitude is what that is. And then I added the red, which is the annual debt service, because total debt can it can be a little bit uncomparative, because you don't know how long they're paying it off over, and how much is that, how much of the tax capacity are we using for that annual piece. So that is the red.
I'm going to go to Dan and then to Mary. Dan had a question first.
In your opinion, why would, and thank you very much for this, because it is exactly what I was looking for, and I'm glad that you added the annual debt service to tax capacity, because it is maybe a better measure, really, because it's what triggered this was I saw that number that we were at about 100%, and that was just sort of a flag for me to go, how does that? Why does that seem so high to me? Right now, when you look at Lakeville and they're at 200, in the life of a city, we're not in the growth years. We're in our senior years of maturity and development. Lakeville is still in growth years. Farmington is still in significant growth years, and to some degree Egan, although theirs is under 50%. Is that part and parcel to the age of the city as it's in a growth mode there is a lot more debt being taken on early on because there's a lot of undeveloped land yet to bring in higher revenues, and in a mature city that would then head down, decline. Like even Egan's actually quite a bit less than us, but.
And it depends on decisions that are made over the years, the facilities and things that are within the city. The length of time that we would amortize the debt over. And it is not really a percentage as it is a ratio. So it's a comparison. So it's that it's not that we've used up all the tax capacity, because it isn't that debt uses up tax capacity.
Right.
The annual debt service would use up some tax capacity, but the grand total doesn't necessarily.
Agreed.
So it isn't necessarily that the 100 is the magic number, as it is just a comparison.
But I appreciate that because it does help put it in perspective. I mean, I understand what the number is, and this helps me understand that getting at 100% in total debt is not a bad thing per se.
No.
And we're not building a ton of infrastructure like some of these growing cities where they're having to take on large amounts of debt to build lots of infrastructure to then, to spur that development. And once that development then fills out and the tax revenues and the capacity goes significantly up, it starts to make that debt, that ratio between the two shrink, as in our case. But thank you. I appreciate that. That was great, very helpful.
Now, did you want to add to that, Mary?
My question's been answered. Thank you.
Okay.
We're still jealous of Egan. I mean, they have a low, both of those. Why is it? They always have, when it comes to tax and that kind of stuff, they're always they're always the envious one on the chart.
Well, we're 27 square miles and they're about 38 square miles. Got a lot more capacity, land.
Yes.
A lot more.
And some big taxpayers.
Okay. So we issue debt annually for special assessments, and we have to, so as we do a road project and in a neighborhood and we allow people time to pay for their portion of it, we do have to finance that. So
We bank them.
we do issue debt related to those projects, but it's for the resident portion, the special assessment portion.
We act as a bank.
And in 2015, in the CIP, we do have the bonding for Cliff Road and 35W, as we've talked about earlier, that project is really more of an iffy amount, but that is in the CIP, right in the budget for now. And we have no other plans for property-supported debt, property tax-supported debt, rather, proposed in the CIP. And then on the revenue or the utility fund-supported debt, the $9.1 million for the meter replacement is in the budget. Whether that all is issued in 1 year, the project itself is split into 2 years. We may split the bonding into 2 years as well. We'll do what is best as we evaluate the particular scenario for issuing debt. We may split that into 2 years as well, but over the course of the 5-year plan, we have it all covered. It'll just be a matter of which year we're going between. And then, as we talked earlier too, we continue to issue debt in the utility fund for some of the projects that are going on, but the larger projects of the water treatment plant renovations would be bonded. So as we're looking at the proposed bonding for 2015, we've got a big year, and it's those meter replacements and the Cliff and 35 interchange. And the special assessments are pretty stable and really depends on the area that is being done. As we look at the 5-year projections on the debt, we look at where we'll be as we issue new debt and then also pay off the debt that is existing. So to explain this chart, the dark green bars, in 2014 that's the debt that is outstanding currently. And each year we pay down some of that debt. So those dark green bars are going down. And then each year adding some new debt. The purple would be our assessment debt, and the blue would be the utility debt, and then Cliff Road is in the gray at the top. As those, so each year, the new debt is also going to be paid down in each future year. So that is the light green. So as it moves on to the next year, it becomes existing debt and it starts to go down. So as you can see, with all of those plans, we're still remaining pretty level in our debt.
Mary?
Would it be fair to say that the conservative in level from year to year management of our debt is a contributing factor to our AAA bond rating, to our getting a AAA bond rating?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
But congratulations. Thank
Yeah.
you for doing that.
Very nice.
Those are thanks to the decisions that you make along the way on these projects, and that is what makes a difference.
Yeah.
Each year, we also would be evaluating our existing debt for opportunities to refinance or refund that debt at a lower interest rate as well. Fees and charges, you have a very long list of fees and charges in your budget book, beginning on page 141. Well, as you can see, it's a 40-page document. You do have a column that shows what the fee was in 2014 and what the fee is proposed for 2015. Those 2015 fees that are proposed do factor into our 5-year plans as we project revenues out. The staff goes through each of the fees every year, and they, depending on the type of fee, use some criteria that's set for adjusting those fees. One of the things they look at is, are we in the market? Are we at the maximum set by an external source? The permits would be an example of that. Entrepreneurial approach. So if we have something that we have a program, are we at the top of the market in that area? And then programs that are self-supporting, are we recovering our costs of service? So if our costs are going up, our fees need to go up as well. And then in the utilities, we do a rate study annually based on the cost of everything that happens in the utility fund, and we set our fees based on that, and that's the whole discussion we've had earlier about fees. The utility fees do represent the vast majority of the fees that we charge. These were all addressed earlier as well, and in the previous meeting that we had, but really the major increase within the utility fees would be in the water and sewer fund, and no increases in the other fund, with the exception of the sidewalk snow plowing, which is a small dollar-wise increase. Every year we address the financial management plan. It's in your budget document under financial policies. This year we have no proposed amendments to the plan. And that concludes the presentation for this evening. It doesn't. We have some other things. This slide got out of order. We'll cover follow-up from last meeting. Question was asked at the last meeting. There's a lot of discussion as to where have we been on our levy increases over the past several years, and during all of the budget pressures that we've had since 2009, when it really kind of all began with the cuts. In 2009, which was before the crisis hit, we had a 3.7% increase in our levy. In 2010, the levy was reduced to 0, and that was done through quite a variety of cuts, including over 20 positions, and also delays in our parks capital funding, a change to our ITF so that we bonded that particular year, and some removing expenses or moving it over to the EDA fund. There was really a lot of things that happened in 2010 to make that happen. And the other part of this slide that's trying to the slide is trying to demonstrate is unusual things that also bore some of the increase in those particular years. So in 2011 and 2014, we had decertifications of TIF districts. And those were planned for a number of years and had specific expenditures that they were covering. And so the increase in 2011 was at 5.2%, but that was planned to absorb some of the cost increases that were a result of some of the cuts in 2010. And in 2014, the decertification of TIF 2 offset a large funding increase to the ITF fund. The purple shows how much was borne by existing property owners, and the green bar shows how much new construction. So when we had new construction in the city, they bring in additional tax base and takes a portion of the increases. So 2012, we had an actual decrease, and that's a minus 3.7%. I did try for quite a while to get that minus sign on the second line, but that's what we have. You can tell by the bar going down. And then in 2013, we had a 2.5% increase, and last year's, as I mentioned earlier, was the ITF increase, and this year's is at 4%.
Yeah, Bill?
And again, I always like to talk about what the net is for taxpayers, and this graph mostly shows that. It doesn't exactly show it on a percentage basis because you don't have the two figures broken out. But the green is new construction and what that will cover in the cost of the 4%. So as I understand, the net estimate for taxpayers is roughly 3.1%. That's roughly a net new construction offset of 9%. Just out of curiosity, what was the net in 2009? I see that the new construction was less. Was that, I'm just curious as to your recollection, what the net and the, I see what the gross number is, but what was the net cost in 2009? Net increase.
Yeah, I think that's around 3%. Or a little less, yeah.
And in 2013, I'm sorry?
About 2.8, 2.9.
In 2013, my recollection then was the net about 2.2%.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, thanks.
I'm going to just skip over that last slide. I'll come back to it. This slide actually was the slide that was prepared in the 2010 budget process, and all the things that went into how we were able to come to a zero that year. The first column was when the original projections for 2010 projected that we would need $3.5 million, and the 2010 proposed really had to cut $3.5 million in order to come down to a zero that year. So that was a mix of all of those things that I had mentioned before. Personnel costs, it meant freezing personnel costs, it meant
huge personnel.
It also meant cutting a large number of staff positions. A big portion is the next line is was reducing the infrastructure trust fund levy and bonding that year. So that was a big portion, $500,000 that contributed to that. In current expenditures, so those kinds of other costs other than personnel, there was $845,000 worth of cuts. So you can see that it was, a lot of times we refer to the 20 positions, but there really were a lot of other factors that went into it.
Yeah, the employee burden. Love that.
Just another graph of the historical levy, where we've come over the last several years. And then as part of that, a subset of that levy is where the ITF levy was over that time frame as well. So as we look back at this graph where there is an increase in 2014, a portion of that was the increase, a large portion of that was the increase to the ITF levy. And then we can go back to this next step. The next meeting is the adoption, budget adoption consideration, which is next Tuesday night, December 2nd at 6:30, your regular council meeting. As I mentioned earlier, we have the virtual budget open house video that is on our website. The link to that there. At that same spot, you can find the budget document that we've been referring to all evening long, and on the website, burnsville.org. Public does also have an ability to comment on that budget video there and send messages to the council on the budget. We have some questions that we have asked, we'd like to ask council, and I'm going to turn that over to Heather.
And Madam Mayor, members of the council, on the previous slide when we talked about the budget comments, we have received 2 budget comments from folks, and we have distributed, we've forwarded those to you all, but we've also distributed them, and they're available in the event we get a request as well. So you should have those in front of you. I'm going to go through these very quickly because we just want to confirm that we correctly encapsulated the discussion. Those were from the last session, and so we got general consensus on the responses to these questions, including where the budget, what the budget levies that we're going to bring to you are, and then the continued request that in future budgets we continue to try and keep those levy increases down to the extent possible. The current direction from the council that we got the consensus on was that we are to maintain current service levels at this point in time. The next, I'm going to keep moving until someone stops me. The uses of fund balance, this is a very quick and easy answer. Our understanding of the consensus was yes, these are acceptable uses of fund balance for one-time uses.
Yeah.
The next are really our new questions that we need some guidance from you tonight, and these are related to the capital improvements plan. The first piece is the 2 large CIP projects that Mr. Albrecht went through, programmed into 2015, the meter replacement, data collection system, and the Cliff Road interchange. I think the Cliff Road interchange will bring you back some additional information, and so that might change, and we kind of recognize that, but really we will need some feedback on the meter replacement and data collection system to make sure you're comfortable with that. And if there's any specific, is there anything specific we want from them on Cliff Road interchange at this point in time? I don't think so.
I think just to let the council know, we will engage some of the businesses in that area prior to bringing it to you too, just to talk about the interim solution and the long-term solution and get some, I don't know, buy-in, but just get their thoughts on it too before we bring it to the council.
Well, it is the way that we do things. We engage our property owners so they are well informed and they can add their input into the process, and so they're fully informed, and that is always very good and very helpful. So Dan, what are you still in support of the meter replacement and the Cliff Road interchange?
Well, I don't think we're going to make a decision on the Cliff Road interchange,
but it's in the program.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's really going to stay in the program based on what I heard tonight.
There will certainly be some expenses related to that.
Yeah, and I think
because we have a study that's going on.
Exactly.
What we'll see, what the council will see, is probably a proposal for some interim, lower cost improvements that will keep the area functioning at a level that we believe is the right level of service, and then a long-term plan that we have out there. This is what we want it to be when it's time to pull the pin on the redevelopment in that area and get consensus on that so we can plan for it and be ready for it. And I think that's where we're headed. So it'll be in our but it might get kicked out several years into the program based on that conversation.
I'm in 100% agreement with that sentiment. Back when we first talked about and we were bringing this project into the discussion, it was, we need to straighten it out. It's a safety. Walmart was going in. Lots of things were at play. But as you explained and articulated tonight very well, the users, what's driving it, the cost. I think I'm glad we're not jumping into just saying, yeah, we're going to, we need to get this done and do 100% of it right away. That we're getting into the analysis a little deeper and learning what we really need to do now and what may have to wait till later. So
A lot of moving parts, but we still need to have it in the plan.
I think that's a very smart plan for that interchange.
Okay, Bill?
Well, I absolutely agree with Dan, and it may be in the plan, but it's way later based on the information you gave and used. As we all know, that quadrant is some of the circumstances of that quadrant. The time of change has changed. So I agree with Dan and as well. So
You asked about the meter,
yeah,
and I didn't
totally
answer that.
Totally.
Yeah, because I believe the way that meter, if I remember right, Mr. Albrecht, this is a potential $250,000 in revenue recapture or capture, since we've never captured it in the first place, capture, which can service the debt on the meter, the cost of
Going to
the-
help defray the debt, and then the users, the actual beneficiaries, it's going to lower their costs of replacing their meter, essentially.
So it's somewhat
Efficiencies also in the functionality.
Oh, absolutely. It's a self-funding project, basically, through
not-
fees and or
No.
Through fees, through fees.
and or the savings.
Yeah.
And I not to the degree that it's 100%, but
It's good.
the majority of it. How would you say if we spend the $9 million exchange out based on the fee for the meters and the presumed capture of water revenues that we're not currently capturing, how would you articulate the cost of that being covered within the budget? In other words, the debt service on the $9 million.
Our long-term plan includes, $175,000 of revenue capture, which we think is very conservative.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be substantially higher than that. I just want to warn you to that.
Yeah.
And so it's a 20-year payback in the plan. So you can do the math there. We're at $3.5 million of buy down just through the recapture of that to defray those costs to the users themselves. So
Right.
they're investing in their system,
Yeah.
and they're getting the payback on what we recapture. And as we get further out and we see what the real numbers are, we'll have a little flexibility there. We may be able to dedicate more of that funding because the way we set up the fee is we looked at, this is a 20-year program. We looked at tiering it, and in the future, do we need to increase it? But if we're capturing more revenue, we can hold those meter rates where they need to be. And then at the end of the program, long term, the meter money is there. It's in a pot. It's dedicated. So as we replace over time, this is an annual thing, not something we do a giant bubble up every 20
all at
years. And then that'll help us fund and have rate stability long term without additional fees and such. So
That's a great
the
project.
plan.
Okay.
Yes.
Bill?
Yep. Yes on the meter.
Yes. Mary?
Yes, on the meter, it's a mechanical thing. Mechanical things wear out. And also, while I'm anxious to do whatever we can to get that MRQ developed, to hire, the highest and best use of the land down there, I think that, as you brought up, Madam Mayor, to take into consideration the rebuild of a 35W bridge over
the river.
I think that it's wise to just tweak that timing, and I'm confident that you figure out how to balance that. So,
Yeah. I think the plan, the meters, I've been all in about them because we need to make sure, as Mary said, replace those. They need replacing. And the return is going to be even better in capturing those lost revenues. Cliff Road, I think the plan that you present to us this evening is the wise way for us to go, especially when there's a lot of moving parts. And what you presented, and looking to the future, because it is going to be portions of it will be certified, and we got authorization to pool that those TIF so that we can, for infrastructure. So I think just really looking out and understanding what's going to happen there is the right way. So I appreciate the work that staff has done to make sure that we look at all of those things while there are so many moving parts. So thank you. So, Ms. Johnston and staff, I think you have it. Move forward with.
Okay, thank you. The next item is related to utility funds. There are utility fees, and it proposes an increase of 4.5% for water and sanitary sewer. We've talked about this at a couple different meetings. And then the residential snow plowing, no increases are proposed for stormwater and street utility. I think typically we would also have another general statement about all of the fees, and so I'll just broaden this question to say, is there, do you have any concerns about any of the increases in the fees that are included in the budget?
Dan? No?
I'm okay. I'm looking through them again now.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've-
there's nominal increases or level.
They're nominal and they cover the cost of
Yeah.
the projects, pay as we go.
Yeah, and the thing is, part of that is the utilities. That's part of our policy in terms of depreciation. Mary?
I agree.
Okay. Stay the course.
Okay, great, thank you.
No objections.
The next question is the 5-year plan for Parks Capital Fund includes an increase of $155,000 in the tax levy support from the general fund for planning purposes to maintain the present size of the park system.
Okay. Dan?
Terry, how could we say no? You know, how many years have we said that?
Yeah. No.
It's been a while before, or I don't know that I've ever, since I've been on council, heard you say, in a few years, we're going to be fully funding the
Yeah.
Parks Capital Fund.
Yeah.
And, that is a good place to be. Obviously,
Yeah.
we've kicked that can down the road quite a bit. And I think, to my statement earlier, we were still able to get a lot of things done. There's a lot of good tennis courts that have just gotten refurbished. There's a lot of new play equipment that's gotten replaced. And so I think our parks are in much better shape than they were 8 years ago. That's for sure. A lot of work has gotten done, even in some lean years. You've figured out a way to prioritize things and get to the things that were the highest profile, the highest use, the most visits, and reinvest. So all good. There's a bigger capital improvement concern that I have that's sort of hanging over our heads related to our facilities tour that I think for this instance related to parks or anything else, I'm comfortable with what we're doing there. We just have to get that elephant, out on.
We have to tackle it.
Exactly. And I'm not sure exactly when that discussion, because it's a little late in this process to do it now, so I think it's an all-day work session discussion, and it's a 2015 discussion to plan for the future. Unfortunately, I wish we could do something sooner than that, but
Heather,
it is what it is.
well, it's a three-part process is what I heard tonight.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, members of the council, it is really a staged process because there are certain policy decisions that we are bringing to you in the next year related to the fire service specifically that will have some outcomes of studies that will also inform the facilities needs for those particular for that particular department. And we are just coming to the conclusion of the facility study that we've done. We want to make sure that we absorb that, and then there's the third piece, which is to figure out some options for you all to fund it. And so we can give you some ideas of what we have been thinking about in that regard, but it's certainly going to be a multi-stage, long-term plan for the facilities.
So you're okay with Terry's 155 in the plan?
Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't said yes to Terry in 8 years. I have to do it once.
It's about time we yes. These are things that our people expect us to do with all of their assets and it's been a long time, so great.
Well,
Bill.
I hate to be a spoiler, but I have some reservation. I think I could commit to the 155 for next year, but I have reservation as to whatever that number is going forward because I'm not sold on. I understand one part of the project on Lake Lavon, but I'm not totally sold on other parts of the project. So I will give a conditional yes as to year one, but for me, I'm not willing to commit to the 925, getting full funding at the 925,000, which would include that whole Lake Lavon project. So,
Mary.
I hear what both my colleagues have said, and but I think, Terry, you've made it clear that these things are going to come before us individually anyway. So I'm very comfortable. I think that you've been a really good and careful manager of our perks and the resources that we give you. So I'm comfortable with the funding that's proposed for this coming year.
Yeah, I'm comfortable because when we adopt the CIP, this is a planning document, and it has funding attached to it. But when all of these things happen, they come to us for approval of the expenditure. So I'm good with it because we need to make sure that we take care of these assets. And we've said to you, no, so many years, it's time that we get to the point of we saying, take care of these things for our people. It's stuff that belongs to the people. We need to take care of it. Okay.
The next question is local government aid, and it's a recommendation from, you're going to have to ignore the second question, please. The budget recommendations for local government aid received over $50,000 be dedicated to the Equipment and Facilities Fund. This is one of those areas where we've tried to decide where to park this, and you all have told us to stick with one time, and we think that maybe if we put any local government aid in a place where we have a need, which is the Equipment and Local Facilities Fund, then we'll be in good shape.
Yeah, one-time expenditures. Dan?
Well, I'm
For right now, that we know that we're having it this
Yeah.
coming year. We don't know the
Right.
other years, but at least it's in the plan.
But you know what? It's not $250,000. It's not. It's such a small number that I'm comfortable putting it in our budget as we expect it to be, and we've absorbed a lot more. I think, what was it, 85 this last year, roughly. That's, we don't know what's going to happen at the state capitol, but if something were to dramatically change and that went away, we can swallow that pill. Fortunately, we're not in a situation. How big was it when it got clipped in 2002?
200 and something.
Yeah, that's a different animal, and that's what you had to go through, and that's a big number. That's quite a bit different than 50, what we're budgeting, which isn't even the whole amount that we got. So I'm very comfortable with putting it there. Maybe it should go in Terry's fund, actually.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, Bill?
I could tell it must be getting closer to Christmas. His beard is growing, and his generosity.
Yeah, the white beard is growing. Problem.
Yes.
Yeah. Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's our last question, unless you have other decision or items for us or other issues you would like to raise.
Okay.
If not,
Yeah. Let me see if any other comments. Dan, you have anything else?
No.
Bill?
We got everything else.
Mary? I think everything is good, and I think Suzanne said it's good too.
Text saying everything's all right. No questions?
with that, the final slide really is just the 2015 budget process. We have one final step here, and that's the adoption of the tax levies for the EDA and the general fund, and the other general levies on December 2nd, next Tuesday.
Yeah, and to our residents, one of the things that we do is that we talk budget all the time. We've been in deep dive in the last 3 or 4 meetings, 3 meetings. But we're in budgets throughout the whole year. It's just that we start focusing on it in June, but it's not that we don't watch the people's money. We watch it all the time. So, and our staff does a wonderful job. And the result of that is a AAA bond rating. And so to Heather and our staff, thank you very much for all that you do, because you deal with the day-to-day stuff. We set the policies and broad perspectives, but we direct you to deliver on those things, and you have. So I want to thank you for all of that. And I'd like to remind everyone that the winter lighting is tomorrow at 6 p.m. at Nicollet Commons Park. Nicollet Commons Park, Terry, when we designed and put it into place, was for the community to gather. And during this time, Burnsville Strong last Friday night was filled with kids and parents coming together to show how caring and compassionate this community is when we lose students, whether they're car accidents or death because of illness. It was amazing to hear the stories of those folks. And then tomorrow we're going to be gathering again, and it's now a tradition in our community to celebrate everything that we've done and to light up the city, and it's paid for by the Burnsville Community Foundation. And they asked that they take over it, and last year was their first year, and this is their second year, so we're going to celebrate with them.
But
Yeah.
even though they've been taking over the lighting ceremony,
Yeah.
as Dan knows because he's
Yeah.
the liaison to that now, they have been raising money for
For
the lights for
16 years. 16 years.
So for 16 years, the city of Burnsville has not paid for those lights.
Yeah.
Or the cost for
Because
power.
they-
So thanks to the Community Foundation.
Yeah, so thank you to those folks and everything that's going on. So tomorrow, winter lighting, 6 p.m.,
The Santa Claus.
Nicollet Commons Park, and Santa Claus is facilitating
Yes.
and presiding.
Thank you for the plug, Madam Mayor. That was great. We look forward to a big crowd and
Yeah. And there's going to
decent
be
weather.
the
It
same-
won't be bitter, freezing cold.
No, and let's hope no
rain.
wind. It's the wind
Right.
that becomes very bitter. Okay.
It'll be chilly, but
Yeah.
but there's hot cocoa and
That's true.
There are a lot of refreshments, hot cocoa, cider, cookies,
Great.
and to all of the partners, Chianti Grill, JoJo's Rise and Wine, Cub, and others who are all
Michael Eck,
partners. Yeah.
Custom Draperies and Blinds purchased all the candy canes, and
Yes, yeah. So that's
he has
going to be good.
an inside track with Mr. and Mrs. Claus to be there, so our kids will
Good.
have Santa there again.
Yeah. So if there's nothing else from our wonderful staff, we stand adjourned by acclamation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.